Mango Thunderslice, and today's video is Bye. Strategic advice from my 60-year-old self. Subtitle, Prepare Now, Son. And yeah, this might seem like a pompous premise, but ultimately I think it's sincere, and I think that ultimately most of the things I say today in this video will be borne out by my 60-year-old self. And this is something that's coming into clearer focus now that I've been basically sober for the longest time since I was essentially 16 years old. And, there's a certain ability that we have as humans at a certain level once we clear, not just our physical body, but the spiritual body, and the ability to see further into time than the average bear, the average human. You can see into the past and you can see into the future, things which you didn't directly experience, because everything moves in a sort of river, right? They describe time as an arrow. It's more like a river, but it's also like it's a rope. And in the future, there's all these basically tendrils that are coming together. The future hasn't necessarily been decided, but the thing is, you decide the future. All of your choices at each individual present moment decide the future. So if you know exactly what decisions you will make in the future, you know who you are on an intrinsic core level, you will be able to know what decisions you will make in those experiences, and you will be able to know what the future that you will create will be. And so I suppose this is a ripe time to tell a story about Mango Thunderslice and how Mango Thunderslice sort of came into being, versus the name that I was given on my birth certificate. And to I guess counterbalance the Christian aspect of the channel, which is not going anywhere. I do consider it to be a valid and core part of my identity now. But at the same time, again, I'm not exactly your average Baptist preacher, shall we say. And this is a story of when basically I graduated from high school, and I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go to Europe for a few weeks. It was a school trip. There were teachers and other kind of parents who were chaperones. Most everybody was a graduated senior. Some of them weren't. They were younger kids who just had even greater fortune to go to Europe. And I had the temerity to prepare for the adventure by before going on the flight, making a batch of pot brownies, of cannabis-infused brownies, and eating most of them before I got on the flight from Reno to San Francisco. And that was a blast, right? Just basically coloring in the Sky Mall, laughing my ass off, just having a blast, and lots of people wondering what exactly did this kid take before he got on the plane. And that was really only the prelude, ironically, to the rest of the story and the rest of the adventure, which was when I got to the airport in San Francisco. A friend of mine who was actually one of the younger kids, a sophomore, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, rest his soul. He came up to me and he basically said, Mango, he didn't say Mango at that time because Mango didn't actually exist at that point, but he came up and said, look what I've got. And he opened his wallet, and inside of his wallet was basically like probably 30 to 40 tabs of LSD. And so I was like, oh goodness, here we go. And he's like, you want to try some? And I was like, well, I just graduated high school, we're on our way to Europe. I've always been quite a wild personality and willing to go places that most people aren't. So I said, all right, well, I guess we're doing that then. And essentially, ended up taking one in the San Francisco airport. It started to kick in on the flight to Chicago from San Francisco, and that was very interesting. Being on LSD for the first time, when you're at 30,000 feet in the air, looking at the plane and seeing basically no ground beneath you, is kind of an alarming experience. It was a little unnerving, a little anxiety, but at the same time, it was a very transformative experience, shall we say. And eventually we land in Chicago and, kind of stabilize in the Chicago airport, just kind of wander around, and basically always stay with a friend when you're wandering around in random airports on substances such as that. Just a little trick of the trade, I suppose. And if you want to engage in such behaviors, but it was really on the flight from Chicago to London, Heathrow Airport, that's where the real transformation began. And because I ended up taking I I believe 6 more tabs over the course of an overnight flight. And this was the longest I've ever stayed awake in my life, because we woke up at probably 4 in the morning to get on the plane to San Francisco from Reno. Didn't sleep on that flight. Clearly didn't sleep on the flight to Chicago. And then basically a long overnight flight to London. But by the time we got to London, it was essentially morning there again. And so I had to start an entire new day. So it was somewhere around 54 hours before I finally crashed. And yeah, quite an experience and series of days. And essentially, yeah, on that flight, taking that 6 extra tabs of acid, and listening to just trance music in my headphones, basically ran my music player. It wasn't even an iPod back then. It was some other brand of music player. Ran the battery to the ground, took my friend's device, basically started listening to music on that, ran that battery into the ground. Ironically, it was a DJ Tiesto track that I just had going over and over again called Ayla, which I pronounced Isla, which is now my first daughter's name, although spelled differently. But the point is, essentially, I felt my entire personality and all of the old operating system of my brain essentially just melt away. And I honestly couldn't remember who I was. I couldn't remember where I came from. I couldn't remember where I was going. I just knew that I was here in this void, in this present moment. And essentially it was like up to me, like a potter at a clay wheel, to create my identity all over again and to reinstall the operating system, reboot the system. And essentially I went to the bathroom a few times and looked in the mirror, and that's always an experience on psychedelics. Looking into a mirror can be dangerous depending on your demeanor. But I just looked in my mirror and I just kind of redesigned my entire self-conception. And, I was a very depressive, sort of atheist type character up until that point. I mean, this wasn't the first time I had taken psychedelics. I took mushrooms probably 4 or 5 times prior to that, and that was also the prelude to my psychic, flowering, of coming out of the actual atheist delusion and realizing that I've been judging this word, God, based on other people's definition, which is a stupid definition ultimately. So who's the idiot? The person who believes in God, or the person who believes in another person's definition of God, which is an idiotic definition? And so by redefining the entire conversation, I was able to become an agnostic, right, of not knowing, of realizing that random chance does not govern the universe. In fact, I have no proof that it does. I have no evidence whatsoever to suggest that random chance governs the universe. It's an illusion as much as anything, on par or greater than the religious fundamentalists, right? And even given the fact that the conventional scientific paradigm is, give us one miracle and we'll explain all the rest, that being the Big Bang, right? Everything came from nothing magically, and then everything after that was random chance. Okay, yeah, that's a rational worldview. That's logical for sure. But, it was through that process that I basically unloaded the old operating system, reloaded the new one, and by doing so, and going through the logical, ontology mentioned at the beginning of the video of knowing your future decision by knowing your true self, I was able to see far into the future, my entire timeline. There were multiple timelines, and I was essentially selecting them because, you don't want to live in a suboptimal timeline. You want to live your optimal timeline. And if you're given the opportunity to see forward into the future, why not choose the optimal timeline? And eventually it came down to 2 timelines. And eventually, there was one of which that was chosen. I believe that I'm on that optimal timeline now. I haven't made all perfect decisions since that time, but that being said, I've learned from my decisions, so ultimately it can't be that bad. The only decision that's truly a mistake is the one that you don't learn from. And, a lot of people, they live their entire lives just basically making the same mistake over and over again. And they live into their 60s bitching about their childhood and about these poor circumstances that they experienced when they were young. But ultimately, no matter what circumstances you experienced when you're young, the onus is on you. It is your obligation to transcend those influences and to create that new identity. I am not what has happened to me. I am who I select to be, as Carl Jung said, or to paraphrase generally. But, as long as you're blaming circumstances or other people or this or that, you are always going to be in that cage. You are always going to be locked into the circumstances suboptimal circumstances in which you find yourself. And it's only when you experience that transformation, self-induced by any means, doesn't have to be by psychedelics. By no means is that the only way to experience this. That being said, myself and many other people have found profound transformative value in such substances, and I do, LSD isn't exactly a natural substance, but mushrooms were placed here by God. I think that they were placed here by God for a reason. I see no reason to suggest otherwise. And even the research chemicals of MDMA and LSD, I think that there's a reason that those exist as well. I think that there's a reason that the brain has these sort of keyholes, and room to be unlocked in that manner. These substances can absolutely be abused. I am not recommending that anyone take them to excess in any case. I'm not even recommending that anybody take them, period. I'm just telling a story of what happened to me. And ultimately, it was in that void that I chose that timeline. I saw forward into the future, and I can't exactly tell you all of the minute details of that timeline, but I can tell you where it goes, and I can tell you what the decisions are that were made. And that's not fully within the scope of this video, but suffice to say that it all came down to my spirit and my energy and my will to move forward in that greater will, which is now I term the will of God, right? The general coherent flow of the universe. Riding that wave, like Dukanamoku on the tidal wave, riding around the island. In this case, the island is the planet. And everything can be achieved when you move within that flow, because there's energy that's so much larger than you. It's unfathomably huge and powerful. And if you would just basically learn to surf that wave, you would stop with the illusion that you need to paddle breathlessly wherever you go. You can just ride the wave. And here we move into the more realistic part of the conversation, which comes into, practical advice, like Ken Wheeler said in a video that I believe is uploaded within the last few hours, of advice that he wished that he learned, and things that he didn't know when he was younger that he knows now, and he's kind of bringing that message to other people, which is, don't work for your money, make your money work for you. And essentially, at some point, you have to work for money, right? Everybody's got to basically produce some sort of seed capital for themselves and start up something. And you can't just sit there and day trade if you have nothing to start with, right? You have to generate capital. But at a certain point, the whole point of making money is to make the money work for you. And, to some people, historically, to many people, it's meant investing in stocks, right? All these different aspects of day trading and investment. And that's not necessarily within the scope of this video entirely, but what I do mean to suggest is that if you're wasting all of your money on idle titillations and entertainment and substances, you're making a grave mistake. If I could go back to my 20-year-old self, I've been paying attention to Bitcoin, for example, since it came out. I just was too busy spending my money on drugs and alcohol to actually put my money where my mouth was and actually just buy $5 to $100 worth of Bitcoin. Had I done so, I probably could be already, on, land and property that I own outright. But instead, again, I was too busy drinking and smoking and doing other things. And, that's neither here nor there, but the lesson is still right here, right now. And so extrapolating that, now I'm no longer drinking, I'm no longer smoking, I'm no longer taking kratom. And I'm basically not looking forward I'm not a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan even. It's a 30-year plan. And even that is just a block within the greater, timeline to conquest, spiritual conquest over all obstacles on the planet towards my destiny, which ends basically in the ownership of a private island somewhere where all people of good faith can come and basically heal themselves and live amongst a community of similar like-minded people and build the foundation of the world to come, which is beyond any of our scope. At a certain point, it's like, even if you think yourself to be so gifted and talented and keen and able to see forward into the future, when we realize that our kids are going to go further than us, that's always the transcendental realization that you might be a genius, but your kids are going to go farther and see farther than you can even imagine. And that's like really hard to fathom, but it's true. And, I see that in my own daughters. I'm already started Isla on her chess lessons. I'm teaching her the names of the pieces and where they go on the board. And in our future lessons, I'll teach her how each of the pieces move. and just basically kind of moving her out of the baby phase and into basically, she's a very intelligent young girl, and she's going to need that stimulation in order to fulfill her potential, right? Because it's in that idleness that we are wasted, that we basically just, become the same as everyone else. It doesn't matter what gifts you were given when you were young. If you spend all of your time drinking and smoking, you're not necessarily going to fulfill any of those hopes and dreams. It really takes a constant dedication. And for me, I'm realizing at this point in my life, that entails sobriety. And I don't want to be spending all my excess time drinking and smoking. I want to be reading things that are of value to me. I want to be building the world that my children will inhabit. I want to be acquiring productive assets. And here's, I guess, the other, part that I've mentioned in kind of the last video and alluded to in the last two videos, is that ultimately the monetary system is already going into the hyperdrive phase, and this was always kind of preordained. There's still a lot of people, even within the investment world, professional investors, who still don't quite get it. They see it happening, but they don't quite understand the nature of it. And they're still just waiting for fundamentals to matter again and common sense to rule again. Common sense will rule the day sometime in the future, but not before the whole thing melts up and collapses entirely. Only when the power grid gets blown out by a mega solar flare, coronal mass ejection, magnetic excursion of the planet, that's when common sense will come back by sheer brute force. But by then we won't have any time to prepare. It will be either you prepared in the time you were given, or you did not, and you're stuck at the ground level. You're stuck fighting for food and for scraps on the street like everybody else. And so the subtitle of the video, prepare now, son. And as the suspicious observers is talking about, within the next 5 years, maybe there's a 20 to 25% chance of a massive solar event that knocks out at least a large part of the grid. But more likely, the real, main act is going to be in the 2030s, and nobody can really say exactly when it is coming, but, there will be signs in the heavens, and this thing will not just happen without some precursor of some kind. But ultimately, getting out of the monetary system and abandoning your legal name, right? None of this ultimately matters toward that preparation. It's all just a bunch of conspiratorial circle jerking for the sake of virtue signaling on a different level than the social justice warriors, right? Ultimately, to hell with the monetary system. It's going to collapse. Come to terms with that and stop whining about it. You can still do everything in your power to manipulate that system for your benefit. It's already being manipulated for everybody else for their benefit if they're smart enough to do so. So why don't you do it for yourself? So that's basically my attitude now. I once eschewed the possibility of caring about my credit score and applying for a mortgage to buy a house and property and whatnot. And now I realize that that was just a young and naive version of myself who didn't quite understand the nature of the system in which he was coming into being. And ultimately, am I recommending anything for anyone? No, I'm just saying what my mentality is right now. Over the course of 2020, mortgage rates have reached record lows, 16 times, right? It is cheaper now to acquire debt to buy a house than any time in my lifetime. And for most millennials, that's a bad thing because it's driving up house prices, but at a certain point, that doesn't happen uniformly, right? It happens in certain bubbles and whatnot. And in certain parts of the country, there's always affordable properties. Really, as long as you have achieved phase one, which is coming to terms with your own self and your own true nature, finding that productivity and pouring that energy into every day to create that wealth on a spiritual level, which then manifests on a physical level, then, if you make a decent wage or you make a decent salary, you can get a mortgage to buy land. And I'm not saying that, if you're going to follow in a similar path, you should just buy some fancy house and just go for the maximum price that you can get. I'm saying look for something that can be productive land. Look for something that can be an actual asset and not just a liability, right? Because for a lot of people, their homes are just liabilities. They just come to it at the end of the day. It's empty most of the day. But ultimately, if you can find a little bit, even just an acre on which the house is built, which is kind of what we're looking at, 1 to 2 acres, a house, up where we live, and a place where we can build a large garden bordering on a small farm, have a garage where I can build and make a whole array of different things, having an array of renewable energy, power systems from solar panels, different sort of switchgear to maximize the value of the grid connection, energy storage systems, generator capacity, and just general resilience in general, redundancy of systems to the point where whether the grid goes down or not in the here or down the line, being able to adapt to any situation no matter what happens. And that is a position where really, if you can generate wealth and value from, the land and literally, pay the mortgage payment with what you can derive, right? And it's beyond money. It's what, I want my daughters to learn how to make things and how to grow things. I want us to be able to make things and take them and be vendors at the farmers markets, where right now we're just buyers at the farmers markets. And even just being a buyer at a farmer's market, right? Stop buying everything from Walmart and Costco and all these big box stores. To the extent that you live around farmers markets, go to the farmers market and patronize these people. It is good to make connections with them, even if you don't even buy that much stuff. But ultimately, the food that you do buy is going to be better quality and usually better prices than what you're going to get at the big box stores anyway. But again, down the line, you acquire productive land, you raise that fountain of wealth out of the land, through knowledge of the biology and the life force, and you basically start to make it a true asset, a capital asset that is producing and not a liability. And, ultimately, then when you can have a base of savings, a base of capital, and capital is just energy, it's just retained energy in a system. And so basically, the people who are anti-capitalist, right, they just have no idea what they're talking about. It's all this Marxist critical theory system of indoctrination that's been plugged into their head, through a bunch of, completely erroneous structures, including the academic world. And, I intend for my daughters to become very educated, but I do not see them going to a conventional school or a conventional university. I think that homeschooling and the decentralized systems to fulfill that on an excellent basis are really coming to the forefront right now. And I know for a fact that most subjects I can teach my daughters better than any of the teachers I had throughout any level of schooling, period. That's not a bombastic statement. That's a pure statement of fact. There's only two real ways to escape the nonsense of critical theory in the school system today, and that's pure numbers or pure letters, right? And even the pure letters I'm not even sure about now, because they're banning books. They're banning the Iliad and the Odyssey because they're too racist. So it might just be pure numbers. If you're going to go to college at all, if you're a young person listening to this, study engineering or don't even go. Tell your parents to give you the money in some other way and start a business, because ultimately it's really not worth it. You can read all the books that I read as an English major by just downloading them online, right? They're all classics. They're all out of copyright. If you just have time and a productive endeavor so that you're not scraping by, you can always just become educated. Just read the classics and read these, textbooks even, and learn things. You don't need to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars to learn these things. And as we build these decentralized systems of education, it's only going to become easier. And right now, all the kids are learning by Zoom anyway, if you can call it learning. Even the kids will admit themselves, I'm not learning anything. The teachers don't care. They're instructed not to care. And so it's all ultimately a sick joke for the people who are still jacked into the matrix and plugged into the schooling system, the single-payer schooling system, for all the people that are so against socialism but don't understand that the schooling system is a single-payer communist system already and has been for some time. Become resilient. Buy things that have value. Increase the value of your own life and raise forth that fountain of energy that will bring, long-term value and wealth to you, to your spouse, to your family, and all will be revealed in very short order. And we'll continue in this theme very soon. Much love to you all, and I'll see you next time. Peace.